Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful to be with you all today. It feels like it's been a very long time. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm so excited to be talking to all of you around the theme of trauma, which actually really surprised me how I got there. And I'm just gonna wait for everybody to start trickling in. Hi Jenny, it's great to see you. And while I wait for everybody to trickle in, make sure you have your tea ready for the session. But as I was saying, it has been so surprising around how this theme of trauma actually came to light, and I'm excited to share that and actually go in it with you. But before we kind of move forward, as I said, I'll wait for everybody to come in. And before we start, I would like to invite each of you so far to kind of think a little bit about trauma, what comes up for you around this idea of support, the idea of trauma, the idea of personality. Is anything coming to your mind at the moment when you hear those words? Any potential ideas, anything that you're interested in? Lee, it's so great to have you here and for everybody to have joined. I'm just waiting for everyone to kind of trickle in. But as I was saying, is think a little bit about the idea of trauma, the idea of support, the idea of personality, and if any words just pop into your mind, just put them in there and just type them out, and we'll speak to those as well. And as I was saying, it was really interesting how I got to the theme of trauma this week, and it really was not a theme that I really thought I would be speaking about. And where it actually stemmed from is the theme that I initially started with exploring was that theme around Muladhara chakra. And Muladhara chakra is very much has to do with our root chakra, okay, our energy system in that area of our body. So it's the cervix, and located in the cervix and perineum, and it has everything to do around survival. It has everything to do around our being rooted and our identity. Now, two things came up for me before I started thinking about this idea of Muladhara chakra, the roots, the base chakra. There were these, the first one was that we have to make things practical. More than ever before is we have to move into the space of practicality, because we cannot just take theories and do readings, because that's not how change happens. Change happens through practice. So the invitation is to take this information. Hi Debs, it's so great to have you here. So the first invitation is to take this information and make it practical, because theory is only going to get us so far, okay? The second invitation is that we have to start looking at the world symbolically as opposed to literally. Okay, because when we look at things literally, that is often where we lose power. When we start seeing things symbolically in a terms of almost a quantum physics perspective of why things happen the way that they do. Oh, Sammy, it's so great to have you here. When we start looking at things in terms of quantum physics, that's when we start looking at things symbolically, and that's when things can change what they look at in terms of a literal meaning. So if we have to look at, for example, our base chakra, which is known as our roots, it's so wonderful. Oh my word, from India. It's amazing to have you here. Thank you for joining. So it's great to have you. And when we're looking at the metaphysical space of Muladhara chakra, what does this mean? Okay, everything below from the waist and below has everything to do with survival. So whether we're looking at our solar plexus, whether we're looking at our roots chakra, which is very much in that cervix or perineum area, it has to do with survival. So metaphysically, absolutely. So when we're looking at our root chakra, this is what it means in terms of a symbolic space. Okay, it represents these areas. It has to represent pain, it represents lower back problems, it represents depression, the comorbidities of anxiety, which look at OCD. If you are familiar with any of those ideas, you can look at it through this type of energy system, which is looking at your lower energy system. If you have those problems, the questions are not about, okay, my lower back is sore, this must be it. It's more about my body is communicating with me. How do I allow myself to listen to that? Candace, it's so great to have you here. And I'm overall talking about how this whole theme came into space of trauma, starting with Muladhara chakra, looking at our roots. So if we have to look at, we know, thank you, Candace. So if we're now looking at our roots, it has to do with the depression, the pain, the lower back. Okay, what is our body trying to communicate with us? Then we're looking at the space of survival. It very much has to do with our connections. It has to do with how rooted we feel with our tribe. I've spoken more in depth about this theme, but I'm just giving a bit of a background in terms of how it comes to play. And this is very much where the idea of grounding headaches come from. It's the instability within our tribe, within our community, and very much of what is happening on a collective space is very it's quite triggering in terms of our joy. It's so great to have you here. Okay, so very much all the roots have to do with our stability. So what's happening collectively is a lot of instability that is taking place right now, and it's really bringing up a lot of tension. Okay, and how this actually led to the space of coming into trauma is that as a society, when looking at South Africa and looking at many different societies across the world, South Africa, for one, is an extremely traumatized society. And research has shown that we have high levels of stress. And specifically now, what a lot of people that I've been working with have been saying to me is that almost with this whole situation happening, people almost are walking around as if they are in this kind of daydreaming, not really here, but they're almost just very kind of disconnected. And the first thing that comes to my mind is the talk that Charlie Ward had with Bridget Edwards, and she spoke so beautifully about this idea of stress, and this is connected to the idea of trauma. So she spoke about the amygdala hijack. Now, if we have to look at what happens to our bodies when we get into a level of stress, if you've ever heard about the saying, you flipped his lid, okay, she flipped his lid. That means that your brain literally got flooded by an extreme amount of emotion, that you were not able, your logical brain was no longer able to process what was happening. It was this overwhelming sensation, and you literally lost it. You overwhelmed, you got angry, you started crying. It was just too much to handle. So what happens when people are in a continuously stressed out space? This is what goes on. So our amygdala is in the frontal part of our brain, and it has everything to do with reacting to our senses. So for example, if your sense of hearing, your sense of touch, your sense of taste is triggered by a certain reaction, your sense of sight, you watching something on the news, you watching something in front of you, you hearing something that affects you and it triggers you, what that ends up doing is your emotions in your amygdala, okay, are now flooding. Now, what happens in that space is that's when we go into that response, fight, flight, or freeze, is your emotions are becoming too much, and in order to protect yourself, you move from this reason, this logic of your frontal lobe, your frontal part of your brain, into the back of your brain, into your hindbrain. Okay, now in your hindbrain, that is very much moving into the unconscious, and it's very much looking at that autopilot mode of responding without having to have that emotion. Because if you think of fight, flight, or freeze, you don't sit there for an hour and decide about the right response. You literally just react as you go, and that is the space that a lot of people are in, okay, is in that autopilot, unconscious fight, flight, or freeze mode. And the danger of being in that space for an extended period of time, and when I talk about extended period of time, I'm talking about people can be in the space for years, weeks, months. There is no set time with how long a person can be in here. But what ends up happening is your body is literally pumping out chemicals such as adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, all of these chemicals. And what is happening in that space is, because your body is pumping out all of these chemicals to keep you in survival, to keep you safe so that you're protecting yourself, is that it goes into, it's drawing out our energy to protect us, and we are no longer able to use that energy in a way that can be of service to us, such as often when we are in extreme stress modes for an extended period of time, our solar plexus is what will suffer because our digestive system no longer has the energy to digest our food. Hence why in stressful situations, a lot of people put on weight, or a lot of people lose weight, is because your digestive system doesn't have enough energy to process information, because it's going towards keeping you into your survival. So when another interesting thing about this, and the reason I'm telling you this, is because this is, when it comes to psychoeducation around trauma, it is so important to understand what is happening in a person's life from multiple different perspectives, so that you can start understanding that. Dave, it's so good to have you here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you're a medical student, so you're more than welcome to contribute to these parts as I go. But I'm speaking to this from a variety of different perspectives. Okay, so when this is very much more of the medical perspective, the psychological perspective. Now, when you have an excessive amount of stress that is pumping throughout your system for an extended period of time, this is when it can show up as things like fibromyalgia, show up as chronic fatigue syndrome. And the reason being is because the way that your body has learned to process stress is on chemicals. And that is a really big sign around the space of, okay, I've got this in my life. Did I experience a specific trauma in my life? Did something happen in my life that I'm continuously stressed because I've got chronic fatigue, or I've got symptoms like this? What's happening, and what is your body communicating to you? So the problem now generally with what's going on is that when you are functioning from a continuous space of your autopilot behind your hindbrain, you are no longer functioning from your rational mind. You are functioning very much from an unconscious space. And what does that mean? When we are functioning very much from an unconscious space, we are more susceptible to things. That's where hypnotherapy is extremely powerful. It takes you into the unconscious so that we can change our way of processing information and work with our unconscious material. But now if we are constantly in that unconscious mode, everything becomes more susceptible to us. So for example, if we are continuously watching the news, if we are continuously filling our mind with a lot of anxiety-provoking things, what are we absorbing? We are absorbing a lot of material that is going into our unconscious. We're not even rationally processing the information. So we are continuously triggering that trauma, even if it's on the TV. And that's where the awareness of what we are actually putting in our space and filling our mind with is very important. So when we're thinking about this idea of trauma, metaphysically, think about, okay, and this is where support is so vital. Trauma and support go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And research speaks so deeply to the fact that support is a vital component in order to work with trauma. So if we're looking at it from a very metaphysical perspective, we're looking at, okay, lower back pain, depression, OCD. It has everything to do with our roots, with our base, our energy system in the lower part of our body. It has to do with survival. It has to do with this idea of connection, community, forming the tribal space. Is that person in a space where they feel like they belong? Okay, it speaks to that idea of we are needing to ground ourselves, that sense of stability. So if you are observing yourself or somebody else in a space where they are extremely stressful, extremely in a stressed out space, the questions around, okay, what's happening with your body? What's going on? Do you have lower back pain? Okay, that's really interesting. What's going on around that? Because what are you feeling right now around the community? What are you feeling? Do you feel that you have those connections within yourself, within your family structure? Is there that sense of stability? And that's where it becomes extremely important that we create that for ourselves. How do we do that? So when it comes to creating the stability, then one of the most important things that we can possibly do is purification. Looking at this firstly from a metaphysical and the science of yoga is purification, because in order to move deeper within ourselves, we have to be able to purify the toxins in our body. So in terms of purification, there's short water cleanses that we do. We go through Jalaneti, which is cleaning out the sinuses. And if you are interested in terms of the purification process, it's one of the vital components in order to really wring out. Because the thing about trauma is not a mental thing only. Trauma stores itself in the cells of your body. So you have to, when you work with trauma, there's no one way of working with trauma. You have to work with trauma from a variety of different angles. So we literally have to wring out that unconscious that has been stored in our cells of our body. And one of the ways of doing that is through purification. Okay. Another incredible way to work with releasing a lot of the stress is through bandhas, which are locks. Okay, locking our base chakra, working with being able to actually the cervix and the perineum, actually focusing on tightening that area, because that helps work with trauma on a deeper level. Now when we looking at, so that is very much the space of metaphysics. We're looking at, okay, when you are in trauma, you're in a space of stress. Okay, now there are three processes. When we're looking now at psychology, trauma and anxiety are very closely linked. Now, trauma used to fall under the brackets of anxiety in the DSM-4 criteria, but now it's its own module and its own section. And the thing about anxiety is that, and why trauma and anxiety are so closely linked, is that there are three areas that we need to consider: physical, cognitive, and behavioral. Okay, so when we're looking at physical anxiety looks at things like heart palpitations, sweaty palms, we're feeling dry mouth. There's a lot of it'll show up in your body. Another way of processing that on the physical is releasing the biology, the chemicals, which then takes your brain, it takes you from your frontal brain to your hindbrain. Okay, goes into the autopilot fight, flight, and freeze response. Okay, we don't want to be there for too long because it releases those chemicals ongoingly and depletes it from all the other areas of our life. Okay, our digestive, actually functioning effectively. When we're looking, so the best thing actually when working with the physical and to work with those crisis modes, and I've spoken about it before, is DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. So if you are in that crisis mode and you're actually what's happened is that you've got those three pillars. You've got your You've got your logical mind, you've got your emotional mind, and you've got your wise mind. Now, your logical mind is when you go into stress. You either go into it's a coping mechanism. You can go into extreme logic in terms of, I need the facts, I want the information, where is this, where can I find this, where's the stats? And it's intensive, but again, you're in crisis. When we get into the emotional mind and we're in crisis, it's very much looking at crying, feelings. I feel this, I can't process it. How do I, it looks at that space. How do we get ourselves into the wise mind? Is we have to look at the process of bringing ourselves into the present moment. And Eckhart Tolle speaks excellently of this, and he speaks so well of this in the psychology space as well, is that when we become over-identified with the future and we move out of the present, we become anxious. When we become over-identified with the past and we move out of the present, is we become depressed. Okay, and you will see that theme. When you become overly identified, what's going to happen in the future? I have no control. Oh my gosh, all of this change. What are we going to do with it? What's going to happen? You're going to see your anxiety levels are going to start to elevate. What's the number one thing? Your physical symptoms will show up. Your heart, your breathing. What do? Bring yourself into the present moment, and you can use your DBT skills. How do you do that? So for example, you use your senses. Now, what does the amygdala do? Remember I spoke to you about the amygdala in the beginning. The amygdala hijack is when your amygdala responds to your senses in an emotional way and becomes flooded with emotion. So you become almost over-identified with what's happening. We're using our senses now to calm our amygdala down, to bring us into a lowered state. How do we do that? Literally. If you are more connected to the sense of smell, go make yourself a cup of amazing herbal tea, chamomile tea, wild olive. Go pick something off of the tree, some flowers. And so wild olive is incredible because that's really a good inflammatory and also for stress. Okay, so you go make yourself a cup of tea and literally focus only on the smell of that tea. And then, because you are helping to bring your mind into that space of concentration. When we go into that space of you can use your sense of smell. Go smell the flowers. You could use the sense of taste. Go and make yourself a delicious meal and focus on eating. What are the flavors? Identifying, okay, there's turmeric, there's salt. Oh, what's that flavor? Oh, there's a little bit of pepper. What are you doing here? You are taking your mind away from the over-identification and overstimulation of what is happening, and you're bringing it to a point of concentration, and you're using your senses to help bring you to that point of concentration. And these techniques are extremely they're so simple, but they are so helpful when you are observing a person in trauma, in stress. What you can do is say, okay, come, let's go get a cup of tea. Tell me a little bit, what's the flavor of that tea like? Oh, what milk did you get? Almond milk. Okay, tell me a little bit about what that is. You're helping that person move out of that crisis mode back into their wise mind. And when you are in a wise mind, you can then look at a situation from a more focused perspective, rather than it being from an unconscious, hindbrain, over rational, over emotional space. You're coming back into the present moment. So that is how you can calm down yourself on a physical level. Now, when we're looking at cognitive, okay, there are these 3 levels of stress which really amplifies, and I'm speaking to this first, and then we'll go into exactly what trauma looks like. Okay, so that is cognitive. And again, that's how you can offer support. When you see somebody in an extremely stressed out space, rather than trying to get the person, tell me what's wrong, what's happening. The person can't think clearly in this moment. So to get a person to try talk about the situation in a space of stress isn't going to work. So what you want to do is you want to say, okay, let's go have a cup of tea. You know what, go and have a bath. I know it's the middle of the day and it's around, but go and have a bath, put some essential oils in that, whatever feels right for you. Work with that, and that's how you can support somebody on a physical level. Okay, when we're talking about cognitive, this looks at your thinking structures. Now, when a person is in a complete anxiety space, which is then moves into trauma, and I'll explain that, is the cognitive structures. One of the areas is limiting beliefs, is how the appraisals of your thinking is affecting your behavior. So for example, I'm not good enough, I'm gonna fail, I'm never gonna survive. That now has a repercussion on your behavior. So looking at limiting beliefs can be extremely empowering, and a process to do that is through Jung spoke very much to this, is transactional analysis, understanding where your beliefs come from so that you can help restructure beliefs that are much more empowering for you. And this has a lot to do with narrative therapy. So if you are very aware of, okay, I have a lot of limiting beliefs that no longer serve me, how do I work with those limiting beliefs? And that is where narrative therapy comes in. I do a lot of processes from transactional analysis, very second order approach of working with an individual. So if that's an area that you want to work with, that is something that we can do together. But it's the process of this is be mindful of what your beliefs are, because that's also how anxiety is cultivated, is in those cognitive structures, thinking structures. And the third one is through behavior. Now, behavior is in your body. So for example, it's very much connected to irritability. Like when people are busy, like can't sit still, tapping, irritable, like that's a sign that anxiety is being processed in a very behavioral way. So how would you work with that? You would work with, say, come, let's do some breathing, nasal breathing specifically. Okay, not through the mouth. Okay, we're not running a marathon, we're doing nasal breathing, which is important because that is how we are activating the parasympathetic nervous system as opposed to the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, now if you have to think about anxiety is not looking like, anxiety is change the rhythm of that. Another thing that you must do helps with behavioral, go into forward bends, literally just flop down. Okay, so those are the three things, and that is how you can offer support to somebody when you can see, okay, there's anxiety, a person's being hijacked with their logical mind is no longer in there, they're no longer in the forebrain, they're no longer with their amygdala, their emotions, they are in the hindbrain, they are unconscious, they're in that working in that unconscious space, they're being overstimulated, they're absorbing everything, there's no blockage to that. People are just absorbing, okay, this is the reality, I'm in danger, I need to focus, oh my gosh, there's no processing because people have literally gone into stress. Yes, thank you so much, Sammy. And that's the thing, is that this is so important because, as I said before, trauma and support go hand in hand, and understanding for yourself firstly what is actually how people are reacting is a specific sign and a cry, not a cry for help necessarily, but you can understand why people are doing specific things, and then you can work with people based on where they're at. So rather than saying, I don't understand why you're being so irrational, that is already an indication to you that something is happening, they're in a space of stress. So this is how I can work with somebody that is in trauma. Now, that's kind of looking at it from a very looking at it from anxiety. Okay, we've spoken about how a flux of being in fight or freeze, fight, flight or freeze, works with chronic fatigue, is working with fibromyalgia. Now, where does trauma come in? Now, there are two categories of trauma, and specifically speaking to post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, what is the difference? Now you get post-traumatic stress disorder and you get acute stress disorder. So now, but this is just psychoeducation in terms of understanding from a psychological perspective. Okay, so acute stress disorder, and this is so important to know because living in a highly traumatized society, we need to be able to understand what trauma looks like within ourselves, because I can tell you now that So many people are working with trauma, but they are actually so traumatized, but they don't even know it because of how much exposure we have. So if you're looking at acute stress disorder, happens straight after a traumatic event, which is something that is unpredictable. It is something that is not supposed to, it's not something that should happen. Okay, it's out of the blue, an event that happens. Now, acute stress disorder happens within a month, and it's usually happens straight away or from 3 days to 1 month. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder comes in after a month. Now, what happens with post-traumatic stress disorder is that people could have post-traumatic stress disorder and they could have had it for years, and then it gets re-triggered by a certain event. Okay, so if we have to look at post-traumatic stress disorder, it's persistent anxiety. It's when the anxiety and the trauma overwhelms the coping abilities. So the individual is no longer able to cope with what's happening, and the trauma overwhelms that. Okay, so your coping abilities no longer work. Now, in children, this shows up in spaces, and it's very similar to soldiers, and the children work with trauma through nightmares, panic, very regressive behavior. So a child that, and it's not in that kind of developmental stage where a child might start bedwetting again. It's a sign that I'm not saying it is trauma, because it's not about diagnosing someone, but it's understanding, okay, this person is experiencing this. What is happening in their world? Was there something that happened to my child, or what's actually going on? Because again, with adults, it's very much flashback behavior, and there are 4 types of symptoms that really manifest with trauma. Now, trauma could be literally from witnessing an actual event. Okay, you just witness a trauma happening, you're directly involved in the trauma. You hear a loved one being affected by a trauma that affects you. So your dad could say, oh, this happened to me, and it could be highly traumatizing for you to hear that happen to a loved one, and repeated exposure. So media is not necessarily included in this, but what's interesting is to observe how by the messaging and the fear and the mass media and what's happening in terms of the collective is creating a type of trauma. So this is where we have to be really mindful, okay, of how we work with it. That is why it's so important to be able to support people during this time, and it's so important to be mindful of how we cope with our own space at this time. Okay, and that's why I'm providing you with a variety of different options. All right, so when we're looking at metaphysics, okay, I need to do some locks, I need to purify my body. Okay, when we're looking at psychology, let me go into DBT. Okay, all right, I'm very stressed or anxious, I need to do a forward fold right now. I need to go into nasal breathing. And you're building up this repertoire of skills so that you can be able to hold yourself in these spaces and your loved ones. So these are the 4 criteria of PTSD specifically. First one, intrusive symptoms. So distressing memories, dreams, dissociative states, feeling like you're out of your body. That's the first one, intrusive. Okay, the second one looks very much at avoidance. So people, you'll start noticing they'll avoid the places that they used to go to, or something, they'll avoid certain events because it triggers a specific memory for them. It could be conscious or it could be unconscious. Negative alterations. So negative alterations can be your thoughts, the limiting beliefs come up, but it can also be things like you don't remember things. You can't remember, what did I do there? What happened there? It comes into that space of negative beliefs, detachment from things, and not in a yogic way, but literally feeling very isolated. Okay, so it's those negative, and also the marked alterations that you could see. It affects sleep big time. Concentration goes out of the wall. Hypervigilance, like if you were in a car accident and next time you get into a car, it's not about getting from A to B. You literally stop 50 times before getting to B. so that's that kind of very, very restrictive behavior and irritability. So the reason that the invitation of looking at this is because when we're looking at trauma, okay, looking at it a collective society, what we are going through now, I really believe is going to trigger a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder for a lot of people. And this within itself is a health disaster in a way. So being mindful of how trauma presents itself, how when you view trauma can you see it within yourself, what's happening with you? And it's not about now going to diagnose you and those around you, but how do you allow yourself to support yourself during this time is the most important thing. And it's not about relying on other people to do it for you, but it's about how do you empower yourself. So that's looking at from a very, very scientific perspective. And now I really want to talk about it from the science of yoga. And what is so exciting is that we have 72,000 networks of energy running through our body. And what this means is that we are not just a physical body, okay? And my Swami, my yoga master, actually provided the most beautiful analogy to explain this idea of how actually trauma can present itself. But think of it like this: we have 5 bodies. Now just bear with me as I explain this. Now it's as if you've seen those Russian dolls, okay? You've got the big Russian doll, and then then you open up that doll, and then you get the other one. Then you open up that doll, and you get the smaller one. And you open up that doll, and you get the smaller one. You've got those different layers, and that is exactly how we are. We don't just have a physical body, okay? We have the physical body. And what is the physical body? So the physical body, as we speak about it, it's all about our lifestyle. It's all about, this is our main awareness, is our physical body, because we can see it, we can touch it. It has everything to do with looking at how we look after our body, what we eat, how much we sleep, the physical attributions of that. It also has to do so much with our lifestyle. Discipline, regularity, balance, awareness, moderation, our eating, being simplistic in our lifestyle. That has to do with our physical body. Now, the next body that we go to has to do with the energy body, okay? And the energy body is, when I talk about this, you know when you are exhausted, you feel like low in energy and lethargic, or when you are very activated, you feel stimulated. What is that? That's our energy. We have to get that energy from somewhere. So what yoga says is we have our physical body. You can see it, you can feed it, you can exercise, great. Okay, we look after our physical body. Then we have our energy body. Now our energy body tells us what is happening. I'm feeling exhausted. I'm feeling awake. I'm feeling aware. Our energy body is telling us that, okay? So if our body is constantly in exhaustion, what do you think that is telling us? It's telling us that we're in our hindbrain all the time, that we are being completely overstimulated. Where does that lead us? Into our physical manifestation of, i.e. chronic fatigue, i.e. fibromyalgia, because our energy body has been working on overdrive, depleting all of these chemicals from our body to help keep us going, that it's now manifesting in the physical form and saying, wake up, okay, I'm going to give you a headache for you to acknowledge something's up. So that's how it connects together. Then we've got the next stall. And the next stall is our mental body. Now, mental body, like I spoke to you before, has to do with our cognitive thinking, everything to do with maybe our limiting beliefs about ourselves, our thought processes. It's also very overstimulated with us. We are aware of what's happening in our mind, and that has to do with our mental body, okay? Then we move into the next stall. Now, Vijnana Maya Kasha, which speaks to the wisdom body. Now, the wisdom body is the ability to be able to use our knowledge and to be able to move in that space of manifesting that knowledge into practices. But it's when all of those other layers of ourselves are in are in alignment, can we really experience the wisdom. When our physical body is okay, when our mental body is okay, when our energy body is okay, we can really enjoy the bliss and wisdom of that. Okay, and then when we're looking at our final goal, that's Anandamaya Kasha, which has to do with the bliss body. That is when we can go into really deep forms of meditation and connection with the divine, with our soul. Okay, but all of those things have to be okay. And an interesting and such a true analogy is that we say, oh, I want to meditate. How can we meditate for 20, 30 an hour if we can't even sit still? So that's what it's saying, is we have to work with our physical body first. Okay, I can see that when I'm exercising, my knees aren't okay. I need to work with my knees. Okay, cool. Work with your knees. Then mentally, I always complain about that. I need to work on that. Energetically, your energy is running downwards. Okay, so how do we work with that? It's obviously maybe our energy has been overstimulated with trying to digest food. How can I work on that energetically? Okay, balancing out our energy body so that we can actually sit down for 20, 30 an hour without moving our body because we're so aligned. So that is what it's saying, is that when we're looking at trauma, we're not just looking at it on a physical level. It manifests deeply throughout all of us. So we have to look at it physically, mentally, energetically, emotionally, how that's drawing up, so that we can be aligned with those three areas, so that we can integrate into the wisdom, so that we can integrate and really absorbing that information and then moving forward from a wisdom perspective. Okay, and how does that manifest? It's all about lifestyle. Okay, the Gone are... And Satchidananda Biha Yoga is moving into the second chapter, which says, done are the days of trying to take yoga to the world. It's not about that. The yoga's out there. People are aware of it, which is incredible. Now it's about, how do I make yoga a lifestyle? It's not about, okay, can I look beautiful? Can I do this? No, it's about, how do I take what I'm learning and integrate it every single day into my life to support me? And that's where it's about moving, so that I can make sure that all of my layers of myself are okay. And that's an interesting way. Okay, looking at myself like a Russian doll. How's my physical body doing today? How's my mental body doing today? How's my energetic body doing today? And that's a really great way to start working with yourself. And now, if we have to talk about, this is deeply connected, so looking at it from the 5 sheaths of ourselves, then we're looking at the gunas. Now, the gunas are our dispositions. Okay, it looks very much at how we are being in the world. Now, for example, we have tamas, rajas, and sattvic. Okay, tamasic means that we are in a space of lethargy. Is that, yes, it could be great when we are focused and concentrated, but it also means that we could be extremely exhausted, we could be extremely downwards, and that connects a lot with the idea of depression. If it's not in that space of harmony, it could be a very low form of energy. Okay, now what did we speak about depression? Lower back. Okay, we spoke about how this manifests in our body. Now, if you're looking at rajas, rajas is the opposite to tamas. Now, rajas is great when it's active because it's dynamic and you can do this and you can go there. But overstimulated, when you are completely in an over-adjustic space all the time, how does that manifest? It looks at anxiety, exhaustion, running here, going there. You never stop and can't sleep, over adrenaline. Okay, that again is not healthy because it's overstimulated. So it's an elevated behavior. And our sattvic is being able to identify the tamas and the rajas, because we don't want to dismiss them. They serve a purpose, but we now want to find the balance of both. Can we in the evening move inwards and relax? Can we during the day find that stimulation and be active? How can we find the balance of both? And that's where the support comes in. And this is also a really, really important space, because when you're looking at people symbolically, it's not about taking things literally. Oh, well, that person is just so such a negative mood. They're so down. I don't want to be around them. No, because that's literal. Okay, you're seeing it like that's what's happening on the literal space. When you look at things symbolically, you're saying, okay, that's interesting. This is what the energy is, very low. They are, and it's not about judging at all. You're just meeting that person within. Low energy, negative thoughts, downwards. Okay, they must be in a tamasic state. Where are they? In their lower areas. Okay, so how do we help that person pick up? If they're in a low energy, we have to get them to be in a stimulated energy. So where does that come from? So instead of with that, you can get them to do, come, let's do some forward bends. Come, let's do some fast breathing, because that's again picking up the breath. You're working with their energy. Okay, if we're talking about the physical, they are obviously overstimulating in their chemicals. Okay, the chemicals, we want to get them into this frontal space. Okay, come, let's focus on something. Let's move into that crisis mode, into a more calm space. Now, the same works with Rajasic. The person is over anxious, stressed, overwhelmed. It's not about saying, okay, well, just relax. It's about saying, cool, let's do some forward folds. Come, let's do some relaxed breathing. Let's go and make ourselves a cup of tea, getting them into that balanced state. Okay, you can meet that person with where they're at, and we can work with that. Okay, that's how we provide support. It's not about coming from, oh, this is what you need to do. It's about acknowledging, okay, that's interesting. Tell me a little bit about where you're at. Let's work with that together. So you're literally meeting a person there. Because if you have to think about how you want to receive support, it's also important. Do you want to receive support by somebody telling you something? Or do you want to receive support from somebody being able to identify and meet you where you're at and say, you know what, I hear you. Let's work with that. Okay? Think about how you want to connect with it. And this is where it kind of brings me into the closure, is when we're looking at the start of where this all began, from trauma and how it manifested, from Muladhara and how it actually manifested into this trauma, okay, is that Muladhara on 3 different levels has everything to do with when we look at a person's personality. From Muladhara chakra, which is your base, from your roots. It has to do with the sense of security. It has to do with the sense of family. It has to do family structures, roots. It has to do with the idea of financial. Are we going to be okay? If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what is the first level that needs to be accounted for? The first level, basic needs. So it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic needs, food, sleep, all of that security is what we are in Muladhara. Okay, is that sense of security, is that sense of financial okayness, is the sense of family structure, of stability. So when you listen to people, how they communicate, do they speak about, do they speak about, my confidence is so low? You already know, okay, they're in their solar plexus. Let me hit them there. Let me work with them there. Are people talking about, money? It's so bad. See, this is where my drama, my acting skills are coming in, yeah. But Sammy, you would be better at this than me. But if somebody's speaking about that space of, oh, financially, I don't know if I'm going to be okay. My family, this. You already know they are in survival mode. You know they are below the waist. You know that they are speaking from the roots. Okay, and then you can work with someone, because then most guaranteed there's depression there. There's anxiety there. You could talk about the space of the lower back. Okay, you get where that's coming from. Work with them on the physical, on the cognitive, on the behavioral. Okay, so let me put this into perspective. Now, Muladhara chakra in Tamas. Now, remember, Tamasic is very low energy, very, very down, very, very depressed. Now, when we're talking about Muladhara in Tamas, this is perceiving the world in a very, very negative view. And it's extreme fear, hypervigilance. Okay, is this sounding familiar to what's happening? I don't make this stuff up. This is the science of yoga. Okay, when we are in Muladhara Tamas, hypervigilance, extreme fear. we are very much linked to that space of depression. We are very much linked to that space of avoidance behaviors. Okay, this has to do with this low energy, okay, of the survival mode. Now, this is the deal, okay, is that we need to change that, okay? Because if this is sounding very familiar, as a collective, the energy is low. Why? Because we're activating from Muladhara, fear, avoidance, hypervigilance. What symptoms are those? Trauma. Okay, we are already acting in a traumatized way. How do we come through this? Is when we're looking at quantum physics. What does quantum physics say? Is that you cannot meet your energy. You cannot change something with the same mindset that was in it. So you can't meet yourself with anxiety and depression and try to figure this out. We have to lift our energy. There is no way that we can focus on a low energy. We can't buy into that, because then we're going to, that is trauma. What did I say? Intrusive symptoms, avoidance, negative alterations, marked alterations. What is your base chakra? All about hypervigilance, extreme fear. Well, you need to combat that on a energetic level. You cannot sit there. What does that look like for you? Physically, do a lot of forward bending, backward bending, do a lot of Bastrika, because we're building up the energy. You don't want to sit in that low fear-driven space, because that is going to make you sick, okay? We cannot continue to sit in the hindbrain. We have to move into the frontal area of our brain, okay? What does Muladhara Rajas look like? So remember, Rajas is more anxiety-driven, this. Muladhara Rajas is that it's more open than tamasic, okay? So you will think more out of the box. Tamasic is down, okay? Tamasic is literally one way, depressive, going down. Now Rajasic is you are more now, but now you Rajasic, so you're thinking about a million things. And what are those thoughts? You're thinking about your family, you're thinking about money, you're thinking about your environment, you're thinking about your house, but it's now dispersed in a variety. So the energy is higher, but now you are just thinking about all those different areas. So there's raised anxiety about possessions, anxiety about this. Again, you're just in a different form. What's happening? Am I going to be okay? What's going to happen? What are you thinking already? Future thinking, right? What's going to happen in the future? I don't have any control. Well, the fact is that we don't have control. The illusion, Maya, is that we think we can control our lives, okay? There are certain things that we can do, but what we can work with and what we can control is ourselves. So if you are in an over-anxiety space about those space, you already know where you're sitting. How do you balance that? You have to come into that space of balance. So again, has to do with lots of forward and back bends. Instead of doing fast breathing, do slower breathing. Do your alternate nostril breathing. Purification is one of the starting points, okay? And then we're looking at the sattvik. Okay, remember the balance of Rajas and Tamas. The balance of that looks at now is that there is still the awareness around the possessions, about finances, about money, but instead of it coming from the anxiety space or the depressive space, it's coming from, I want to cultivate more possession in terms of money, but I want to share it outwards. So I want to be able to make money and buy things, but I want to be able to share those things with maybe some homeless people out there, people that need it. That's how you work with this, is that you're connecting to the higher self of Muladhara chakra, which is not about being overstimulated about the lack of, I don't have this, or over anxiety or depressive and fear and avoidance and hypervigilance. But what you do is you shift that balance and you say, okay, instead of looking at the coin of lack, I'm going to look at the coin of abundance. I'm going to cultivate that. And how do I support myself during this space is how can I support other people? So instead of thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to survive? Work with, okay, I'm going to, instead of buying one loaf of bread, I'm going to buy two. And I'm going to give it to somebody on the side of the street. How somebody chooses to receive it is up to them. That's not your stuff. But that is how you move out of that. So that's how you change your energy in that space. So you're moving out of that rajasic, and out of that depressive space of tamas, and you're moving into that space of being able to balance the both, where you're working with the possessions, but in a different mindset. Okay, so Colleen, it's so great to have you here. We're almost done with this chat, but it is recorded. So listen to it and let me know if you have any questions. So in a nutshell, we have traversed the idea of trauma. And as I said, trauma, extremely traumatized society. Okay, looking at it, what is to make things practical, and that we have to look at things symbolically. We looked at the metaphysical space of it. So how does trauma manifest in terms of our energy? What is it a representation of? Our roots, our connections, has everything to do with our survival. Okay, then we looked at trauma, first looking at the space of anxiety, looking at stress, how that manifests itself, how the media is playing into this. Then we're looking at things of specific things that we can do to help with our physical, go into the DBT, cognitive limiting beliefs, transactional analysis. Be aware of what your beliefs are. What new narrative would you like to cultivate? We work with narrative therapy. If you're looking at this idea of behavioral, then it's looking at, okay, changing your behavior, doing forward bending, going into specific type of breathing. Okay, you manifesting your whole book of coping skills for yourself. And then we're looking at the science of yoga, which helps us look at the lens of symbolism. When we see people, it's not about, well, that person says they are depressed. Well, I don't want to be around a depressed person. No, that's looking at it very literally. What symbolically, what is that saying? That whole word in itself gives a whole wealth of information. Okay, we looked at the 5 bodies. We have the Russian dolls, the 5 different layers of that. We looked at our gunas, which is our disposition. Are we more elevated? Are we more relaxed? Now, it's not about saying that if you like more elevated, that's not wrong, but it's when it's overstimulated. And when you're when you completely depleted, over depleted, is that, I don't know if I got that right, but if you depleted, you're going into that depressive state. We want to come into that balance space, and it all has to do with Muladhara. So if you understand, if a person is talking about family stuff, if they're talking about possessions, they're talking about money, they're talking about that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety, you know where they are coming from. So now you can't now say to a person that's in this space to now think about love, because they are so not there. You have to meet a person where they're at. Okay, we're here. Got it. I'm with you. Tell me about it, what it looks like living there. Okay, I could see they're very much in that tama state. Let's move that person to rajas a bit. Let's help that person find the balance there. Then we can move to the higher forms of ourselves. So that is a nutshell of trauma, and how to look at it very much in terms of empowerment and also about support. So being mindful of how to support someone in these spaces, but also being mindful of how to support yourself. And in order for us to be very aware that we do not completely suffer from PTSD based on the trauma of everything that's happening right now, is we have to work with the symptoms that we're seeing. Okay, let's work with that. We have to create that depth of awareness and work with the changing of narrative. So, and move out of that unconscious space of absorbing all that susceptible information that is not helping you around the negativity, and moving into a more empowered, activated space. Okay, so that's that. That is Tea with Jean today. It's been really amazing sharing all of this information with you, and I feel like that was quite a roller coaster ride. There's so much to talk about in this space, and please let me know if you have any questions. Just post any questions if you have any, and if there is anything that you would like to ask me, anything like that, you're more than welcome to just send me a Facebook message, or just send me an email at jean@lightupwithin.com. Thanks, Debs. Thank you, Jeannie. So yeah, let me know if there's any questions. And until our next session, which will be in 2 weeks' time, please let me know what comes up for you, because it's so important to make these conversations relevant to you and what is happening. So let me know if there's specific themes that are coming up for you that you would like to look at, or a specific curiosity, and we can go into it, because it's about a holistic approach in order to create change, because change doesn't just happen on a mental level. It has to happen mentally, emotionally, physically. And as I said, trauma stores itself in our cells, so we have to work on multiple levels when working with it. Okay, so are there any questions that we have? And I can't believe it's been a full hour. As always, it's been a gift, and thank you for each of you for using and spending your time with me. It really means a lot. You definitely help keep the conversation going. So if there's any questions or anything like that, please just pop them in the chat. And until next time, it's wonderful. Thank you. And I hope you have a wonderful evening or morning, wherever you are, afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. I think that's what the Truman Show would say. Okay, thank you so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Okay, bye everyone.